Hey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's executive panel discussion on what comes next in HCP engagement trends in 2021 and beyond. My name is Mark DiCangilio, and I'm with Kantar Health and the Intellis Webinar Committee, and I'll be your moderator today. So I'd like to share some housekeeping notes while everyone is getting logged on. I'd first like to ask everyone to update their names on Zoom to include the company you're with, and this will help our panelists provide extra context during the Q&A sections. You could do this by hovering over your name in the participants list and clicking on the rename button. And if you have any technical issues, please submit them in the chat. Okay. Intellis has many online year-round resources available through the Member Resources tab at intellis.org, just one of them being webinars like this. You can watch over 30 Intellis videos and VHPIA webinars from 2020 on demand via our virtual learning center at intellis.org. So this webinar counts towards our new Intellis certification program requirements. If you're working towards this achievement, please email Heidi@intellis.org for the short quiz to complete for credit. The IWCP information is available on intellis.org. So we save time at 3 points during the presentation for questions. Please submit questions as they arise in the Q&A section. We'll also be conducting a few polls throughout the event. Finally, the slides will be sent to you after the webinar. And if you miss any portion or would like to recommend this webinar to a colleague, it will be available on demand in a couple of days. Please now allow me to introduce our discussion leaders, Scott Wilkerson and Abby Ahern, who will then introduce our panelists. So Scott is a partner at Hawk Partners. His areas of expertise include market segmentation, brand strategy, channel strategy, communications development testing, and market opportunity assessment. He has extensive experience working with clients across multiple industries, including pharmaceuticals, healthcare, technology, telecommunications, financial services, and media. Scott has managed hundreds of engagements for clients in the US and abroad, and much of his recent work in healthcare has focused on ways to improve the HCP customer experience. Abby brings 18 years of experience in research and consulting across industries. She has led numerous projects spanning all stages of the marketing lifecycle for a range of financial services, media and telecom, nonprofit and healthcare clients, with the latter including manufacturers, distributors, managed care, and other service providers, giving her a broad perspective on the evolving needs and challenges of industry stakeholders. Please welcome Scott and Abby.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mark, and thank you to the whole Intellis team for hosting this great event. I will be very brief in my introductory remarks. Just for those of you who may not know us, Hawk Partners is a marketing research and strategy consulting firm. We're based in Boston, and we focus on advising our clients in 4 main areas. The first is marketing communications, development and testing, branding, go-to-market strategy, and customer experiences, which is going to be the focus of what we talk about today. So, just a little bit of background on the topic. I mean, given that we do a lot of work at Hawk Partners in healthcare, specifically in the pharmaceutical industry, this idea of how do you engage with healthcare providers, or HCPs, as we call them, has just become a huge topic for almost all of our clients. And particularly considering the pandemic, it's become even more critical. And so we've had the pleasure of partnering with many of our clients to help them understand future trends, customer needs, and potential solutions in this area. So actually, Abby and I have partnered together on a few different projects relating to the future of HCP engagement. So that's kind of where we came up with this idea, and we were so thrilled to be co-hosting this panel. So in a moment, I'm going to just share a few of our thoughts on some of the macro future trends that Hawk Partners anticipates based on our work in the industry. But first, I'd love to introduce our all-star panel of executive subject matter experts on this topic. So please join me in welcoming our 3 panelists. So I'll start with Sherry Gilligan. Sherry is the Chief Marketing Officer at Mayo Clinic, which is a not-for-profit academic health system that cares for more than 1 million people each year from all the states in over 140 countries. And in her role, Sherry oversees all marketing, including strategy and insights, brand strategy, creative studio, customer experience, and product lifecycle management from both the US and international perspective. So welcome, Sherry. Our second panelist, Shweta Maniar. Shweta at Google Cloud, Shweta leads the life sciences solution strategy, as well as develops and manages a variety of customer and partnership relationships while identifying new opportunities. She's a great innovator. She's a game changer, and she's a relationship ambassador in her role. She brings an impressive network of established healthcare system clients across digital health, technology, investor, pharma, medical device, and hospital systems industry. So welcome, Shweta. And last but not least, our friend Robin Verlinde from Sanofi. Had the pleasure of working with Robin in his past roles in pharmaceuticals. Robin's joined Sanofi in January of 2020 and currently is the head of customer engagement for North Europe. Prior to that, Robin held several global European and local leadership roles within sales, marketing, business effectiveness, and digital customer experience management, both B2B and B2C side. And Robin has worked with 3M and Philips before moving into the pharmaceutical industry, where he worked at Pfizer and Bristol Myers Squibb. And Robin holds an international executive MBA and is passionate about delivering an effortless experience to his customers. So welcome, Robin, and thank you, panelists. We're really excited to have you here today. So before I turn it over to Abby, let me just take 30 seconds or so, and I want to provide an overview of the 3 macro trends that we foresee driving the future of HCP engagement. So clearly, and I'm going to share my screen here. Clearly, there are many different trends that are driving HCP engagement. So that was our panelists here. And in terms of the trends, the 3 that we wanted to focus on for today are, we think, really critical. The first is what we call greater channel integration and coordination, which is really, this is the coming to fruition of the shift of marketing and sales models in the industry from a multi-channel model, which is many channels but working somewhat in silos, to an omni-channel model with fully orchestrated touch points that work together, and that really facilitates a seamless customer journey. The second key trend that we see happening is a transformation in customer-facing teams. So this involves a few different areas. I mean, number one, we see the role of the traditional sales rep really changing quite dramatically, really moving towards being less a siloed player focused on transactions and sales to a much more integrated member of a multifunctional customer-facing team. And we see a number of other roles, which we'll talk about in the discussion, becoming more prominent in this future world. And then the last macro trend, and this is really what we see as like an enabler or an engine of these trends, is what we call AI, or artificial intelligence and machine learning driven personalization. It's really transforming these technologies that are cloud-based technologies, are really transforming the industry, and they're going to enable a lot of specific personalization in terms of content, programs, channels, and a lot more. So we're excited to talk about that as well. So those are our key trends. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby to talk about the first trend.
Thank you, Scott. Our first trend is going to be channel integration, or from multi-channel to omni-channel. Before we start, I'd like to ask Heidi to pull up our first poll. And we're gonna show a poll at the beginning of each section and give you about 30 seconds to answer the questions. This first one is, what are your organization's top 3 challenges related to channel integration? And as you're answering this, I'll just give a reminder to submit questions in the Q&A as we go for each section. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Okay. I know that wasn't a lot of time, but it looks like we have a variety of challenges, whether it's technological, organizational, or I don't see much from compliance. Maybe if we scroll down, I can see that. All right, I think you can hide that now, Heidi. And Sherry, I want to start with you. As somebody who heads up Mayo Clinic's marketing organization, I wonder if you could speak to some of the work that Mayo has been doing in 2020 and will continue to do in 2021 to move towards this more integrated omni-channel world.
So thank you, Abby. It's nice to be here. Thank you, everyone. We are moving more and more toward this omni-channel thinking. We have stood up now a customer experience product organization that will look end to end at the customer. We have a partnership with Google that around the data side of this so that we can use data to move us to the omni-channel so that we're presenting people the information they want, when and how and which medium they want. Prior to 2020, we were more challenged with having different channels and mediums in different parts of the organization. As the pandemic happened, we really had to adjust. First with the stay-at-home orders, as well as reduction when the governor in our different states reduced elective surgeries. We had to work with the practice to really figure out what surgeries should we be doing, where should we be spending our marketing dollars so that we weren't promoting people to come to Mayo Clinic when we couldn't even accommodate them. As we shifted out of that, we shifted into really two message shifts. One around being safe for care. So now please do come back, especially if you've put off your care. And the second around virtual. So virtual has, it used to be people would have to come to Mayo Clinic for a couple of days. Now they can do a lot virtually before they even show up, which is awesome for everyone, for us, for the patient, for everyone. And then as we evolve into 2021, we're just going to continue. All the channels are integrated. We all talk, and it's a substantially better place right now. So thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm curious, what do you see 3 to 5 years down the line? If you can, hopefully the pandemic is over. How do you see some of the work you've been putting in this year panning out, and what will that omni-channel experience look like?
I think we're going to see healthcare accelerate into, what we at Mayo Clinic like to call 2030 strategy, but it's really more like right around the corner now. It is where, your phone, your mobile device has become your bank, and it will shortly become your primary care physician, where we have our embeddables and wearables that are monitoring people. And through the use of AI and machine learning, we'll be able to know stuff about you way before, from a patient perspective. And from a provider perspective, being connected into a network where we can get more records and cure more diseases, working with our provider community a lot quicker, to me is just where this whole thing is going to really accelerate. We'll be able to catch diseases and treat people before they even know that they've got something. And working with our provider community is the best way to do that, because a lot of what happens out there happens in that community.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, I think, Robin, were you wanting to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think we're on a similar path, but in particular for healthcare professional interactions. But it's also sort of what we're saying in the company is we want to answer the questions before the HCP realizes he or she has a question. So using machine learning and AI in that sense, and literally moving from a sort of a push model to pull model, and ultimately to a predictive model in the future. So that's sort of the path that we're on.
Okay. And I'm wondering, and maybe Sherry, starting with you, I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the organizational challenges and some of the things that you're doing organizationally to kind of enable this move forward.
So I've only been there for about 18 months. We hired a chief digital officer as well. And she and I are standing up our teams with chief data officer, as well as product management, product marketing, the CX work. We are really, and we've moved more toward an agile use of, we use agile tools. I've used that in other places where I've worked, but now we have agile teams. And the beauty of agile is Mayo Clinic's vision is the patient, the needs of the patient comes first. That's been our vision for 150 years. So in the practice, you will see heads of neurology come with heads of oncology to figure out what's wrong with this patient. And there's no issues with moving patients around and all that. The practice just comes together. And that's what we're doing on the marketing front, is pulling people together from all sides of more of the business side to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the patient and the needs of the customer or pre-patient or post-patient, so they can fully interact with us. We have a lot of pull that comes out of Mayo Clinic, to Robin's point, because a lot of people come to .org. It's a heavily visited site because it's heavily trusted. So we're working more even on how do we push to people at the right time through the right medium to make sure they're getting the information that they need.
Great. Shweta, as someone who works across life sciences and works with various companies, I'm wondering if you could comment on that in terms of, where you see your other partners moving and how they're approaching some of the challenges to get there.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty broad question. Perhaps maybe I can, to Sherry's point, right? Everything changed into virtual pretty much overnight, right? Including our own organizations, and everybody was trying to grapple with how do you predict behaviors of your customers or your consumers, depending on what industry you're in. And so I think a comment that I can make that's actually not specific just for life sciences, or not even just for the healthcare and life sciences industry, is that we were having a difficult time trying to predict behaviors because there's no historical context or precedence that has been that's been made. So what we saw is that it wasn't a question of just becoming of how do you do virtual effectively, but it also became how do you effectively conduct some of that real-time demand sensing and that forecasting. And I think Robin, you touched upon that a little bit, but be that in the healthcare systems, when you're predicting the inflow of patients based on the time of the year, or retailers who are using historical purchasing data, I think there's some commonality that we were all using prior data and somewhat sophisticated statistical models for forecasting. So what we saw is that these forecasting systems became suddenly not effective, right? They couldn't take into account those granular factors with the impact. If you're talking about earlier in 2020 about the local weather data in the COVID world, shelter in place, all of these things that actually impacted some of these demand patterns. So what we realized is that healthcare and life science companies actually needed to take a look at how do they deliver telemedicine to drive awareness, not for just COVID, but also not just for COVID-19, but also for patients not necessarily getting diagnosed or going in for their appointments. So one of the things that we saw specifically around the Mayo Clinic was the need to put messaging in front of them via the digital advertising, right? So was it Google or YouTube, banners on different websites, became even more important. So it's a very interesting time how our organizations have had to pivot overnight.
Yeah, hearing a lot of that turn to push versus pull,
Exactly.
Common theme here. How about, I'm wondering if any of you could speak to the integration between online channels and offline channels, and how you go about approaching that. You know, and now we have telehealth, and obviously that makes it a little bit easier to manage some of those person-to-person interactions. But you know, in general, what do you see as you know, solutions to that issue moving forward, and how you can integrate them?
So are you talking about from a patient perspective, the virtual versus in person, or are you talking more about the channels?
That's a good question. It can be either. So either, you know, if you're a life sciences company trying to work with a provider, how do you make sure that the experience is seamless between, and we'll get to customer teams in a minute, but between teams meeting with providers and between their interactions with digital channels?
Yeah, so I think I understand. I mean, we use a lot of marketing channels to providers. We, you know, have the emails, we have provider pages, we have all of that stuff. We also know that, you know, our TV advertising, our online videos, all the blogs that we do, they all contribute, as well as social media, and give halos. It's kind of the old retail, you know, if you have a freestanding insert and an end cap, you get 3 times the amount of take. We see that multiplying with as channels. So TV is always tough to monitor, but we know that when we have TV, messages on TV, we get a halo effect to the digital channels. And so we also know we get a halo effect into providers' integration and interaction with us from TV as well. So it's important to have all the channels working and not just rely on one channel. As much as Google would probably love us to spend everything on search, if we do that, it doesn't work. We have to be in social, we have to be in the other channels as well. And our providers, the provider networks are a huge piece of that. They get a lot of our content via blogs. We have new blogs that we publish every single day, several. So there's stuff out there. There's one today with Dr. Poland, who everybody knows, on the vaccine. And so there's just so much content. My biggest issue is how to deal with the huge amount of content that we produce, frankly. It's awesome, but there's a lot of content out there.
Okay. Wondering if either of our other panelists have anything to add about integration of online and offline channels?
I'll just add maybe one point to Sherry's point. I guess the only thing I'll say is, regardless of what Google wants, right, it's about following the consumer or the patient behavior. And so I absolutely agree with your sentiment, is that there needs to be a balance, and the balance has to be reflective of behavior, right? So fully agree with that sentiment.
Okay. And let's see, I think we're just, for this topic, I think we're just about out of time. So we may have time for 1 or 2 questions. One that we have here is, when you're looking to adapt your current approach to marketing engagement, especially considering the pandemic influenced marketing landscape, what would you say the crucial steps to take are to adapt?
So first and foremost, we work with the practice on their capacity, and where we have capacity to actually handle more patients. So that's first and foremost. Second, we work with our medical professional network. We're always asking them, what do they want to see? And of course, during the pandemic, the most popular blogs and videos were around COVID and how to treat COVID. And Mayo just came out with a paper where we have much lower mortality rates. So we're sharing that with everybody to make sure that the world, if there's any learnings that we've had, that we can get that out to the world, so that the world can, healthcare providers everywhere can be aware of what we've discovered. So in some cases, you know, it's very different when you're a not-for-profit. Having been in the for-profit world, you know, when you discover something, you kind of keep it secret. Well, Mayo doesn't. We share everything because it's the right thing to do. And so that's, you know, there's a provider section out there that that people like to go to. And so we shifted to a lot of video blogging. We shifted to a lot of, a little bit more email. I know nobody wants to get email, but what we've heard from providers is that they do want to hear from us so that they can adjust things as needed.
Great, thank you. Shweta or Robin, anything to add?
I think it was similar for us as well. I think what I really sort of as a positive output of the whole pandemic was it was so much easier to work with other HCPs around the world because there were so many questions around education specifically related to, for example, cardiovascular and COVID or diabetes and COVID or whatever. And it was so much easier, and the willingness was, I think, much greater to work together around the world and create webinars or podcasts or whatever was suitable for in terms of the format for the education. But that was certainly a very positive output of the focus on digital in such a short time.
That's great. Okay, and we do have one more question from Hillary Roberts. Hi, Hillary. In orphan disease states, it can take years to be diagnosed. How can integrating channels help with that? If anybody wants to take that. And if not, we can take it offline.
So there's one of the channels is an advocacy group. So we have advocacy groups for every disease type that are out there via the Mayo Clinic social channel. And some of these advocacy groups are 10 people, and they share, and in some cases there's not a diagnosis, and they share what's happening with their world. And oftentimes there are physicians that go into those advocacy groups and might have some things to share. So I think that's what you meant, Hillary, but I'm not entirely sure. Again, the future of all this is to be able to cure more diseases quicker. And so if you've got something like that coming into an advocacy group and then sharing your story can be really helpful. So that's a way marketing in the channels can help.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to pass it on to Scott now to talk about customer team transformation.
Thank you so much, Abby. So our next macro trend is customer team transformation. And I think Heidi, if you wouldn't mind, we'll launch the second poll question and give everyone a moment to address that. So the question is, what are your organization's top 3 challenges related to customer-facing team transformation? And think about that in the year 2021 and a couple years beyond. And you can select up to 3 answers. If everyone could submit their questions, please. Heidi, we'll give it a few more seconds. And as Heidi's tabulating the results, I'm actually going to share, we had a few for each topic area. We had a few of our own Hawk Partners observations on the trend. So we weren't sure if we'd have enough time to share, but I'm going to share them for the next 2. But I'll wait till Heidi pops up the quick poll results. And we will share the poll results back with everyone. So let's see, it looks like number 1 answer is lack of technology to support team knowledge management and coordinated activities with 59%, which is interesting. Okay, so we can perhaps touch upon that in our discussion. And the number 2 answer is insufficient team integration coordination. And looks like the number 3 answer is poor understanding of HCP's non-clinical needs for the administrative and the financial. Okay, great. I do think we're going to touch upon those. So Robin, you're up next, but just briefly, I'm going to throw up the couple of slides just for context. And again, when we did our analysis at Hawk Partners, a couple of things we saw or foresee happening with customer-facing teams in pharma and healthcare is, we definitely see the size and nature of the sales forces changing. And, when we talk about incentives and metrics, it's going to be less around pure reach and frequency metrics and much more around the quality of the interaction as a metric. we definitely see the required skill set of the traditional sales rep evolving away from being sort of this more transactional and sales role into more of the sort of the facilitator or orchestrator, coordinating across a lot of different channels. And Robin will talk a little bit about some of those skill sets he's seen at Sanofi. And then we see a bunch of different other roles emerging, clinical, technical, and other administrative roles as part of this holistic team serving the HCP. And so the other slide, and Robin's going to talk to this, but he's going to talk a little bit about, how do companies like Sanofi uncover needs during a virtual or face-to-face call? How does a rep succeed in consultative selling? And sort of, the old role of having a fixed territory instead of customers, how's that going to evolve in the future? So I'll take that down. And so Robin, to you, you get the first question here. My question is just thinking about this topic of customer team transformation. How do you see the trend playing out in 2021 and beyond? And please feel free to bring in your experiences at Sanofi and other organizations.
Sure. And I think it's also related to what came out of the poll, the first one. I think I see three sort of big areas. The first one, I will focus a little bit on the sort of sales rep and then move into the broader customer facing team. I think the first one is really the slide that you just showed is we've typically focused on hard selling and then moving into consultative selling and uncovering those needs. But I think the very near future will be sort of the predictive models and using that technology and AI to help understand what the customer needs before they sort of realize they need it. And that can help the people in the field as well, because the machine will be able to sort of analyze a much broader set of data. And reps might do a visit at HCP in January, and the next visit might be 1 or 2 months later, for example, but maybe in the digital space, there's happening so much in between in terms of interactions. So this will actually open up what's happening in between and allow the people who are sitting in front of the customers to sort of build on what has happened in the past. So that's a big area, I think, in terms of predictive modeling. The second one is a little bit more to the broader customer-facing team, maybe where I think I see sort of a more flexible model running than what we have today, is where you have fixed territories and people have their own sort of HCPs that they look after. But I think as needs and behavior and expectations also change from healthcare professionals, and they're sort of not looking into one pharma company and compare them with another pharma company, but they compare them with a bank or an airline industry or whatever. So I think we really need to step up in terms of the experience we give to them. And as that, I think, evolves, it's sort of, you get maybe a model that says, well, there's a group of customers who we can perfectly serve fully digital. There might be a group of customers where it's a little bit more hybrid, but it's not sort of what we have now, your own HCP for your own sales rep. But it's much more like first, whatever the question is from the customer, somebody's going to answer it via phone, chat, remote, whatever that might be. And the third bucket might be really in terms of helping customers to succeed in their institutions on much more complex issues they have, and then serve them based on whatever they need. And then that's sort of changing and evolving the roles of customer-facing teams as well, because the questions become much broader these days. So that's, I think, the third sort of point is where you move from a sort of sales rep or customer-facing teams much more to how do we work together across silos to sort of put the success of the institution or the customer at the forefront and really helping them to be successful. And whatever sort of disease area you're in or vision of the company you have, that determines probably what sort of skill set you need, but it's going to be different than what we have today.
Got it. Thank you very much. And Robin, one quick follow-up for you. What would you say is the biggest challenge your teams have faced in kind of implementing or moving forward with this vision?
The biggest. No, I have to choose. No, I think it also came up with the first poll is sort of how do you break those internal silos? But it's also changing the culture. And that's very difficult when you're sort of shareholder driven sometimes. So it's there's a lot of pressure, of course. So it's very hard to sort of say if the CEO comes down and say, do you need 50 more reps? Because I just come from a shareholder company and there's pressure. How do you deal with that? And are you brave enough to say, no, I need other skills? So that's one area that is typically a challenge in terms of change management. But what I see, at least in Sanofi, we're really moving in a very good position to change that. So that's very helpful. But I think the internal silos and breaking that and the change management is probably sort of the biggest challenge.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shweta, love your perspective on this, just where you see this customer team transformation going. And as a bonus, since I saw the lack of technology to support team management was number one, if you have any comments on that challenge, I'd love to hear that as well.
Sure. So quite a loaded question. So first thing I want to say, no, that's all right. So first I want to say, I love the survey that you did, because I think that really started to get at the heart of the problem, right? And I think this is part of the reason why you asked such a loaded question. So one of the things I'd like to highlight is that every organization, and since Robin is speaking, I'm going to talk from the life sciences side. We're seeing that all these organizations are going through some sort of digital transformation across their organization. This week, even at the JP Morgan conference, right, almost every organization has highlighted some version of their digital transformation, or that is part of their continued focus. So when I've had the opportunity to talk with different healthcare and life sciences execs across the world, right, it's no surprise that priorities have actually not changed dramatically. I think that there's a lot of challenges that surfaced very quickly last year, but they still want the same things, right? How do we deliver better patient care, robust pipelines, maximizing, patient value across your value chain, be that if you're a pharma company or, a healthcare provider. But they're having challenges on how do you actually adopt to the new digital world. And I think that's where we see organizations like ours, come into play here, right? This is not something that we can just provide to the Mayo Clinic or to provide to Sanofi and we say, okay, you go on your merry way, right? There is a need to help bridge and partner in that in a way where we can bring along and work with organizations on how do you think about what is it that you actually mean by a digital transformation. And so that's actually why we're partnering with Sanofi, is to better understand their digital aspirations actually across the value chain. I know Robin works in one very key important area of Sanofi, but really looking across the value chain about what are some of their key business challenges, and how do we bring technology to bear, and how do we do this in a measured and scalable fashion. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot more that I could probably go into that if we have time later.
Great, thank you. I want to give Sherry the opportunity to comment on, either her perspective on where she sees the customer teams going, and also just remind you if we probably have time for one or two questions in the Q&A if folks have questions. But Sherry, your thoughts?
So we started to embrace Agile pretty heavily. It's funny because a lot of people say Agile started in Silicon Valley, in the 70s or 80s with software development. I always like to say the Mayo brothers really invented it, 150 years ago, because they will pull, on the practice side of Mayo Clinic, will pull in whatever physician needs to be pulled in to diagnose a patient. And that really is the core of Agile, is the putting the customer or the patient right at the center and pulling in the cross-functional team that needs to be there to directly address it. The tool, so on the marketing front, we're not as, we don't use all the tools that the IT organization would use. We tend to use Microsoft Planner, so I like to kind of say that's Agile Light. But having that as a Kanban board has really helped us be really integrated and focused on the customer or the provider, and making sure that everything within my organization, everybody knows everything that's going on. So there isn't duplication of effort. There isn't, if they get asked by somebody in the practice, what are you doing here or there? My entire team knows what's going on. So it's been a really effective tool for us.
Fantastic. Last question is just, we've seen the potential for new roles emerging, and some are different in different therapeutic areas, but I mean, there's things like, diagnostic managers that, particularly in oncology, will help provide education on biomarker testing and other things. We've seen, the increase in importance of things like reimbursement managers to help with access for patients. We've seen different roles pop up around nurse education and other things. Just curious if any of the panelists have any thoughts on any new or different roles they see emerging at their organization that will affect the HCP engagement model.
I think I will start and let the others weigh in. I think it is sort of a difficult question to give one direct answer, because it heavily depends on sort of what you're aiming to offer to customers and the disease area that you're working in, and maybe even your life cycle product, where your product is in its life cycle. I recently got a question, for example, from a hospital who said, how do we optimize the entire patient pathway? It was a cardiologist, so they've been really good in treating patients and helping them to survive, which is fantastic. But we also face an elderly population, so they need to treat sort of more patients with a chronic disease with the same amount of resources. So they're thinking way differently now how to optimize their entire pathway. So suddenly you're talking about sort of innovations in virtual healthcare, but you also talk about patient journey designing and those kind of things. So the sort of skill sets is completely different. And of course, you can start small. And I think, as Sherry is constantly saying, in terms of agile, you can sort of work with partners there and start very small and try to scale. And once you see it's successful, you can sort of look into it. Do I need it to have in-house? Yes or no? But again, it depends a little bit on your disease area and what you want to offer.
Perfect.
I'll just add.
Sherry, I think final comment, and then we're going to move on to AI ML.
So I'll just add that the other industries are way ahead of healthcare. And so looking at financial services in particular, as I mentioned at the beginning, your phone is now your bank. And so there are other industries to look at. And Robin nailed it. It's around the patient experience. And I would say even beyond the patient experience to pre-patient, post-patient. How do we, remember the time when you used to have to reconcile your bank accounts, or you got a telecom bill and you had to go through it with a magnifying glass? I mean, we don't do any of that anymore. And so we need to get healthcare into that same space.
Fantastic. Thank you all. And I see there's one outstanding question. If we have time at the end, we'll cover it. But I want to give the last topic its due respect. So with that, I'm going to pass back to you, Abby.
Thank you, Scott. All right, Heidi, if we could pull up the last poll. And this question is, what are your organization's top 3 challenges related to leveraging AI and machine learning and other technologies related to patient engagement? And Heidi, whenever you see the answers starting to come to a trickle, feel free to share.
We're still getting a bunch coming in, so I'll give it another couple seconds.
Okay, internal teams not fully trained is the #1. Lack of robust data or data lake is high, and lack of clear protocols on the use of AI and ML technology. So it's really interesting. Scott, I'm wondering if you can pull up the slide on some of the things that we found as I guess, assumptions or foundational to this development of AI and ML-driven engagement. So these are a few things in our research we came up with. First of all, the customer engagement model will be built on this one customer view across data, across channels and interactions. And in a way, we thought, we had considered starting with this topic in that when you think about HCPs engaging with digital channels and then engaging with customer teams. In a sense, AI will sit on top of those and plug into both and help to provide this one customer view. The second one is AI and ML being used to provide recommendations on engaging with HCPs. So what channels, what content, when, once it gets to kind of understand an HCP. It will be used to predict and improve patient outcomes. I think that's been mentioned already. And then of course, companies will wrestle with balancing the desire for personalization with concerns about data privacy. Okay, and I'm gonna start this one with Shweta. And Shweta, I'm wondering, someone overseeing partnerships, if you can tell us a little bit about some of the developments that you've seen in the use of AI and ML to further customer engagement, and to the extent that you're able to share, and any initiatives Google Cloud and partners have planned for 2021 and beyond.
Sure. So I'd be remiss if I didn't address the elephant in the room about the industry dynamics, right? I'm going to speak let's talk about the life sciences industry, even though I think this can be extrapolated a bit broadly. It was significantly impacted due to COVID-19, but I would say the silver lining out of all of this is that the pandemic has actually sped up the evolution of life sciences. So what we're seeing is biopharma and device manufacturers are adjusting to forecast to factor in things like delayed launches, how the pandemic might affect trials, its data, renegotiation of contracts with health plans due to a sharp drop of volumes. So all of that to say, there have been some major changes that we've seen in life sciences that were surfaced this year, as I had said, surfaced last year, I should say, because of the challenge of the year. But we're also seeing that organizations are trying to support stakeholders through, I would say, alternative channels, right? Life sciences traditionally have relied heavily on in-person education. And now we've seen and had a chance to support a lot of solutions on how we help support the virtual, and this is not just about putting a banner on top of your page, but actually supporting with actual solutions that different life sciences organizations have been able to use with their customers, with their HCPs or with their education efforts. Another area, Abby, that I've seen is also manufacturers of drugs and devices are partnering with more of the market access stakeholders to ensure that continuity of care. And I think that the life sciences organizations have taken more responsibility of that, right? Which maybe historically that didn't fall on their shoulders. So we're seeing a lot of real world and social data inputs are becoming extremely valuable to these organizations. And then as it relates, just, I do want to highlight on, precision medicine, or more loosely, maybe personalized medicine or healthcare, or some variation of that term in life science organizations. While we're seeing a lot of these digital first strategies focusing on patient-centric approaches, starting from the bench, they're also becoming a steward of user experience by using that value-based customer-centric design products. So that's just another area. And then the last I would say is supply chain efforts, of course, have come under scrutiny as well. So while we were all thinking about where to get our Lysol wipes and toilet paper last year, I think it also brought the challenges of the life sciences industry and their supply chain challenges as a visibility gap. So I think one of the positive things, and again, Google had a hand in this, as well as COVID-19 also brought together a lot of the unusual and sometimes unexpected collaborations with governments and regulators. And so we've seen a lot of collaboration between what would be competitive companies, particularly around research efforts. So to answer your question that you originally asked, I'll say you'll see our focus from a Google Cloud perspective really aligned with these industry shifts that I've mentioned. As our colleagues in both healthcare and life sciences have pivoted quickly, we've had to move in lockstep with them. So a lot of our solutions and areas of focus will be how do we serve them? We used 2020 to really focus on how we serve our partners in the industry so that we can get them moving with as much minimal disruption as possible.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, do you have any examples you can share, whether it's with dealing with the supply chain issues or working with market access folks of companies that have done that particularly well or pivoted particularly well. And if you can't share anything, that's okay too.
That's okay. Actually, I would maybe first lean on my colleagues here on the call if they would like to share on any of their experiences, because we have the fortunate happenstance that we've got partnerships with both organizations.
Sherry or Robin?
Jerry, you want to take this one? I think you guys are a little bit ahead of us, but happy to weigh in otherwise.
Yeah, so we've had partnerships with Google for years. The knowledge panels, et cetera, are all part of a partnership with Google. If you Google any disease and it comes up on the side, we're going deeper with Google around diagnostic experiences is our next big piece. And, you know, my last point is, and it's been said several times, the most important part of that work is that we put the patient in the middle, and we always do. Partnerships don't work when people look at what they as a company or a hospital can gain. They only work when you put the patient in the middle, and really then everyone is revolving around that patient. So that's how the partnership with Google works right now. We have joint steering committees. We have all kinds of stuff going on as we're trying to, again, ultimately cure more diseases.
Thanks, Sherry. I think that's a perfect summary of the work that we're doing. I think another example, Abby, if I can just chime in before you ask another question, because we've got a lot to unpack here. I think is that what we've seen also is with telehealth, since we touched on that very, very briefly, I think we've got this partnership that we've announced with Amwell last year. And I think the timing of that was very, very significant, right? As HCPs are facing unprecedented workloads, trying to understand how do they actually use telehealth. I think what we've seen is that, and my stat might be somewhat off, but we've seen more than half of the providers are looking, HCPs, I should say, are looking at telehealth more favorably than they did before COVID-19. And so what we're seeing here with our partnership and what we're seeing with the capabilities of telehealth is that how do we now look at how do we build the capabilities and incentives for the clinician workforce to support that virtual care moving forward? How do we, one of the biggest challenges, and I'm posing this not just to everybody here, but also to myself, is how do we measure that value of virtual care by quantifying clinical outcomes? If, you know, and time will only tell that, right? This is not something that we can do right now. So there's a lot of partnerships and ways that we've worked with different partners, but I think time will tell on how effective some of these bets that we're making.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see, Robin or Sherry, I want to make sure I give you enough time to talk about any AI, ML initiatives at your respective organizations, and how you're using that to foster HCP engagement.
Yeah, I think we're also like in the early stage, and I think it was also addressed in as part of the outcome of the poll, sort of the data or maybe the lack of data. And I think that's where we're starting, is really think about the long-term future. What is it that we want to get out if we would have all the data in the world, and what would we do with it in terms of bringing in superior customer experience? And then from there, we're working backwards on our AI strategy, saying what's the data quality and quantity that we need to collect, and then sort of mapping that the data governance and architecture, because we also work with a lot of external partners to do, for example, webinars or whatever it is. So there's a lot of customer behavior data sitting with external third parties. So we need to find ways to actually get it into our organization as well. So that's really where we are. So I think that's sort of my recommendations to others as well, is that start early with collecting the right data, what you need, because often you find that the quantity and quality is not what you want for AI to really work for you. So that's sort of a learning point, and start as early as you can and collect that. And then even if you're not using it today, but at least you have it for the very near future.
Thank you. And Sherry.
In our world, we have, significant amount of data from a healthcare perspective, but we don't have the marketing data that we need. What channels are people using? How often are they using, et cetera? And what's most important on the data privacy side is making sure that we're segmenting the marketing data from the health data. And marketers don't need to see much of the health data at all to make sure that we're talking to people. And so it's there's a whole concerted effort around HIPAA, privacy, and all that kind of stuff. Super important that we understand the types of data and what data we need to get. And I agree with Robin, getting the other supplemental data is, start early on that.
Okay. All right, so we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and I believe there's some coming in from chat as well. I'll start with one from an anonymous attendee. I'm curious if any of the panelists has an opinion on how to make sure AI doesn't perpetuate inequality in healthcare.
Maybe I can start.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Go. Okay, I'll start, but I think this is going to require input from all of us. I think from a Google perspective, right? This is something that is part of the way that Google teaches and trains within the organization, right? We are focused on creating awareness internally when different solutions and tools are being built. There is constantly an input from diversity of internal and external experts when we're trying to make a concerted effort to very much focus on making sure that there is no continued inequality. We're working to translate complex, I think, ethical and technical concepts into practice with our solutions. And it is a constant. This is not just some training that somebody does and then they go on their merry way. This is a constant daily effort to mitigate potential harm, inequality, to make sure developing solutions that are creating a positive impact and constantly iterating upon this. There's a lot more that I can go to about our, kind of tech ethics that we have in practice and some of the issue spotting best practices that we have in our organization. But this is certainly something that we take very seriously because it is part of how I think that we have a responsibility to ensure we remove as many, if not all, of the biases.
And I completely agree. We actually have a paper coming out today on disparity in healthcare, and it's there is disparity in healthcare. Let's not try to sugarcoat it. I think what we've learned with virtual is that can help reduce it. I also think the AI and ML work can help reduce it because it makes everything more uniform and accessible. And then, Mayo, we've committed over $100 million to fight racism. We talk about it all the time, and it is in every conversation. How do we get, it's racism, but it's also access from rural communities as well. So it's both from, but we along, as Shweta said, huge commitment from Mayo to focus on this and get it, play our part in getting it in a better spot.
Great. And we got another very thought-provoking question, which I'll give Robin the first opportunity to answer if he'd like, or you can pass it. So how will these tools actually change practice during this time? E.g., how are MSLs and reps adapting their approach, or are we moving to the death of the rep?
So for the latter, I don't think so. So there will always be customer-facing colleagues. But I think what is sort of a challenge is the more you move into AI and predictive models, I think it's sort of a with digital in general. I think in the old days before COVID, people saw sometimes who were working in the field, so digital as some sort of a competition. Is it going to take over my role? Whatever. What does it really mean? I think that has gone sort of during the pandemic. Everybody was seeing like, hey, this is actually complementary. So that's fantastic. But I think the next challenge that we're going to face is with AI, and if the machine is actually telling somebody in the field what to say and what to do to whom and when, that's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, for the near future in terms of change management. But I think as long as everybody sees that it's helpful and complementary, then it should work in the same way as digital channels in the past.
Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Scott. I think there's one more question coming in.
Yeah, I think just to be respectful of our panelists' time, we do have a few outstanding questions, and apologies. We will email responses, but wanted to give it back to Mark actually to close us out. So thank you.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone for sharing your insights today. Really appreciate it. And if you're interested in getting more involved by joining a committee or presenting your own webinar or at the summit in April, or want to get feedback on needed resources vital to your success, please contact Heidi Boyle at heidi@entellus.org. Thank you for your time today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.